I was only 10 years old when my father came into my room for the first time that night. Something inside me died. And it didn't come back to life until many years later when I met my Matthew. Good morning, friends. This is Gertrude Williams, 73 years young, speaking to you from my little home in Shelbyville, Kentucky. The ceiling fan is running at full blast because this heat won't let up, but thank the Lord today I have peace in my heart. It wasn't always this way. Today I'm going to share a story I've kept locked away for more than 60 years. A story of pain, of unspeakable cruelty, but also of liberation. Before I begin this difficult journey, I'd like to ask a small favor from my heart. Please subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Give this video a thumbs up and tell me in the comments which corner of America you're watching from, and what was the most difficult moment in your life that you managed to overcome. This helps me continue sharing my stories and perhaps help other women who might be going through what I experienced. Life isn't easy, but together we grow stronger, don't we? I was born in 1951 in a small wooden shack in rural Kentucky. My mother, God rest her soul, was a fragile woman with tuberculosis. She spent more time bedridden than on her feet. My father, Peter, worked in the fields growing corn and tobacco. He was respected in the community, attended church every Sunday, carried his Bible under his arm, a God-fearing man. The neighbors would say if only they knew the truth. We were 4 siblings. I was the oldest, followed by 2 boys, and finally my baby sister. From a young age, I took on grown-up responsibilities. With my mother ill, I was the one who kept house, cooked meals, washed clothes at the creek, and looked after my younger siblings. I barely had time to be a child. I remember my father always looked at me differently, a look that made my stomach turn cold, a fear I couldn't explain. When I turned 10, I understood why. It was a night of heavy rain, the kind that makes the wooden roof leak everywhere. My mother had been taken to town. She had a high fever. My brothers were sleeping together on a straw mat on the floor. I had a separate little corner, a small space divided by a chintz curtain my mother had sewn. I woke to the sound of the curtain opening. It was my father, smelling of moonshine. I thought he was coming to ask me to heat up some food, as he sometimes did when he came home late. But that wasn't it. Stay quiet, Gertrude, you're almost a woman now. What happened that night and on so many nights afterward, I can't describe in words. The pain, the shame, the disgust, the fear, all mixed together in a dark pit inside my chest. Each time he left my room, I would curl up in a corner, hug my knees, and cry silently so as not to wake my brothers. I tried to tell my mother once when she had a good day and managed to get out of bed, "Mom, Dad is doing things to me." She slapped me across the face before I could even finish. "Never repeat such a thing. Do you want to kill me with grief? Do you want everyone to know that Peter's daughter is a liar who makes up stories about her own father?" I never tried again. I learned to live in that hell day after day, year after year. I became a quiet girl who kept her eyes down at school. When I still went, I kept to the corner, didn't play with the other children. Inside me there was just a great emptiness. When I turned 14, my mother passed away. Tuberculosis finally took what little strength she had left at the funeral. While everyone cried, I felt a different kind of despair. My mother, even sick, even not believing me, was a presence that somehow limited my father. With her gone, what would become of me? It was worse than I could have imagined. Without my mother to serve as a witness, my father became bolder, more cruel. Now it wasn't just at night in secret, it was whenever he felt like it. And if I resisted, my younger siblings would pay the price. "If it's not you, it'll be your little sister," he would say. And I, to protect that 5-year-old child, submitted to the horror. I started thinking about running away. But where to? I had no close relatives, no money, no one I could trust. The people in the country admired my father, thought he was a poor widower raising 4 children alone. The school teacher once asked why I missed so many classes, why I was always sad. I tried to give her signals, to tell her things weren't right at home. She spoke to my father, who explained that I was rebellious, ungrateful, that I made up stories because of my mother's death. The teacher never looked at me the same way again. The years passed like this in this daily martyrdom. At 16, I seriously thought about killing myself. I even got a rope, went to the old oak tree behind the house. But when I already had the knot made, I heard my little sister crying out for me. I couldn't abandon her. Who would protect her if I wasn't there anymore? It was around this time that I met Matthew. He had come from the big city, Louisville, to work on the construction of the road that would connect our community to the neighboring county. He was a handsome young man, strong, with an easy smile, about 10 years older than me. We crossed paths at the market when I was selling cornbread to help with household expenses. Missed that. Cornbread looks mighty fine, let me have 5. I handed it over without looking up. I was used to not looking any man in the face. My father had sick jealousy, said I was his alone. And if he saw me talking to any man, the punishment was terrible. But Matthew was different. He stayed there eating the cornbread slowly, watching me. It wasn't a look of lust like other men, it was a look curious, as if he was trying to solve a mystery. Are you always this quiet, or is it just with me? I gave an awkward half smile, looking at my feet. I'm just like this. Well, I think there's a lot of story behind those sad eyes. I looked up, surprised no one had ever noticed my sadness before, or if they did, they pretended not to see. Matthew started showing up at the market every Sunday. He always bought my cornbread, always stayed a little longer to chat. At first I barely answered, afraid someone would tell my father, but gradually I opened up. He told me about the big city, about the places he had seen, about his dreams of one day having his own mechanic shop, and I, without realizing it, began to dream too. One day he asked me why I always wore long-sleeve blouses, even in the heat. I lowered my eyes, not knowing what to say. The truth was that I was hiding the marks of my father's fingers, who had squeezed my arm hard the night before. I burn easily in the sun. Matthew didn't say anything, but I saw in his eyes that he hadn't believed me. The following week, when we met again, he brought me a gift, a small bottle of arnica for the bruises. He said simply helps them heal faster. I was speechless. How did he know? Had it been that obvious after almost 2 months of meetings at the market? Matthew invited me to take a walk to see the stretch of road where he worked. I refused immediately, terrified. I can't. My father, your father doesn't need to know. You deserve a moment of joy, Gertrude. I ended up accepting. I told them at home that I was going to fetch water from the pond, that I would take a little longer. For the first time in my life I did something just for me, something that gave me pleasure. We walked along the new road, smelling the damp earth, listening to the birds. Matthew told me funny stories, made me laugh like I hadn't laughed in years. When we were already on our way back, he held my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it made my heart race. A gentle, respectful touch, so different from my father's rough hands. Gertrude, something wrong is happening at your house, isn't it? I stopped walking, the fear coming back strong. I was going to deny it as I always did, but something in his look, the sincere concern, the kindness, broke down the walls I had built around my secret. My father, he does things to me since I was little. The words came out in sobs between tears. I could no longer hold back. For the first time I told everything, how it had started, how nobody believed me, how he threatened my siblings if I resisted. Matthew listened in silence, his face getting darker and darker. When I finished, I was trembling, certain that he would judge me, think I was dirty, ruined. But instead Matthew hugged me, a strong, protective hug that made me feel safe. For the first time in years, I'm going to get you out of there, Gertrude, I promise. No one's going to hurt you anymore. At that moment I didn't really believe it. I had heard promises before, the teacher who said she would help the neighbor who suspected, but never did anything. Why would this man who barely knew me be any different? But Matthew kept his word. The following week he showed up at the market with a proposal that would change my life forever. Come with me to Louisville. I have an aunt who can take you in until we get married. Married? I asked, thinking I had heard wrong. Yes, married if you want to. Of course, I know it's fast that we barely know each other, but I feel that God put you in my path for a reason, and I can't leave you in that house for one more day. I was speechless. Marriage was something I had never imagined for myself. I always thought I was too damaged, too dirty for any man to want me as a wife, and there was this good man offering not only escape from hell but a chance at a new life. But there was a problem he didn't understand. I can't leave my siblings, especially my sister. If I go, my father might do to her what he does to me. Matthew thought for a moment. How old are your siblings? The boys are 12 and 10. The little one is 7. And do they know what your father does? I shook my head, ashamed. I think the boys suspect. Sometimes they look at me in a way as if they're apologizing for not being able to help me. The little one doesn't understand anything, thank God. Matthew took a deep breath. There's room for everyone at my aunt's house. If we can get you all out of there together, will you come with me? My heart almost jumped out of my mouth. It was more than I had ever dreamed. Not just me escaping, but taking my siblings, keeping them safe too. But how? My father will never allow it. He'll come after us. He'll kill us. Leave that to me. I'll think of a way. For 2 weeks we planned everything in secret. Matthew spoke with his aunt in Louisville, arranged money for the bus Tickets, even got documents for the boys to be able to enroll in the city school. The plan was to escape in the early morning when my father would be too drunk to notice until dawn, but fate had other plans. 3 days before the planned escape, my father caught me talking to Matthew on the way to the pond. I had gone to fetch water and found him on purpose to settle the last details. We didn't see my father approaching, hidden among the trees. I only realized when I heard the shout, "Whore, is this how you thank me for everything I've done for you?" I froze. Matthew stood in front of me, instinctively protecting me. "You must be Gertrude's father." "Pleasure, I'm Matthew. I have serious intentions with your daughter." My father spat on the ground. "Serious intentions with her? You don't know what you're taking home, boy, a filthy pig." That's what his words were. Sharp knives. Even after years of abuse, it still hurt to hear the contempt in my own father's voice. Matthew remained calm, though I could see the anger growing in his eyes. "Mr. Peter, I've come to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. I have a job, I have a place to live, I can give her a dignified life." My father let out a laugh that froze my blood. "Marriage? She's not fit to be anyone's wife. She's already spoiled since she was 10 years old. And do you know by whom? By me." The world seemed to stop there. He was confessing out loud what he had done to me for years without a drop of remorse. The shame that I had carried alone was now exposed in front of the man who, against all odds, had fallen in love with me. I expected to see disgust, disappointment on Matthew's face. Instead, I saw pure fury. Before I could blink, he lunged at my father. What followed was quick and confusing punches, shouts, the sound of bodies rolling on the ground. My father was strong, hardened by farm work, but Matthew was younger, driven by a righteous anger that seemed to multiply his strength. When it was over, my father was lying down, his face bloodied, breathing with difficulty. Matthew was standing, his knuckles scraped, but with a firm look. "Get your siblings, now we're leaving today." I ran to the house, my heart pounding in my throat. I quickly explained to my brothers that we needed to leave, that it was our chance for a better life. The boys understood immediately, helped gather what little we had. My little sister thought it was an adventure, laughed while I hurriedly dressed her. We left through the back door with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a cloth sack with a few changes of clothes. Matthew was waiting for us on the road in a wagon borrowed from a friend. We all got on, looking back one last time at the house that had been our prison for so many years. We caught the first bus to Louisville the next morning. During the entire trip, I held Matthew's hand, still not believing that this was real, that I was finally free. My siblings looked out the window, amazed at the new landscapes with the promise of a life without fear. Matthew's aunt welcomed us with open arms. She was a widowed lady with white hair and a sweet smile who lived alone in a simple but comfortable house in the Butchertown neighborhood. She looked at us, 4 scared children with worn clothes, and didn't ask a single question. She just showed us the room, served a hot soup, and said we could stay as long as necessary. That's how my new life began. 2 weeks after arriving in Louisville, Matthew and I got married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. There was no white dress, no party, no guests except his aunt and my siblings, but there was love, there was hope, and most importantly, there was safety. Matthew got a job in a mechanic shop as he dreamed. I took care of the house and my siblings, who started attending school. Gradually, I began to heal. The physical wounds healed quickly, but those of the soul, those took much longer. In the first weeks, I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, thinking I was back in that dark room with my father coming through the chintz curtain. Matthew would hold me, calm me down, patiently wait for the terror to pass. He never forced me into anything, never demanded the wheelie duties that other women complained about from their husbands. He waited for me to be ready to learn that touch can be gentle, that love doesn't have to hurt. A year after our escape, we received the news that my father had died. He drank so much that he fell into a ravine on his way back from the store, broke his neck. I felt nothing, neither relief nor sadness nor anger. It was as if he had already died for me. The day we crossed the county line towards our freedom with Matthew, I discovered a love I never thought I deserved, a patient, respectful love that didn't demand, didn't hurt, didn't humiliate, a love that taught me that I had value, that my body was my own, that I deserved to be happy, and for many years I was truly happy. We had 3 beautiful children raised with love and respect. My siblings grew up, studied, built their own lives. The shadow of my father became increasingly distant, like a nightmare that with time loses its clarity. I thought I had won, that I had left the horror behind, but fate still had a final test in store, one that would test everything I had learned about strength and survival, a test that began the day my Matthew, my protector, my savior, my love, closed his eyes forever. Chapter 2. Life with Matthew. The 32 years I lived alongside my Matthew were the best of my life. He was a man of few words but many actions. He never needed to shout to be respected or raise his hand to show who was in charge. His calm gaze, his strong presence already said everything. By his side I finally learned what peace was. Our life in Louisville wasn't luxurious, but we never lacked the essentials. We first lived in a rented room at the back of his aunt's house, then managed to buy a small plot of land in Butchertown, and built our house little by little, one room here, another there, as money allowed. Matthew worked during the day at the mechanic's shop and at night did odd jobs fixing refrigerators, televisions. Whatever came up, I took care of the house, of my siblings who were growing up, and later of our own children. Our first son John was born in 1972, 2 years after we fled from the country. I confess that childbirth was one of the most difficult moments for me. The memories of my father came back strongly, the fear of being touched, of feeling pain, but the midwife, Mrs. Zephyr, seemed to understand. Without me having to explain, she was patient, respectful, explaining each step to me, asking permission before examining me, and when I finally held my boy in my arms, something healed inside me. It was as if that baby had washed away part of the dirt I felt in my soul. Look, Matthew, he has your eyes, I said, crying. When my husband came into the room to meet his son, Matthew cried too, without any shame. A man who cries with emotion has a big heart. My friends. Then came Margaret in 1975 and Joseph in 1983. Healthy, intelligent children raised with love and respect. I always made a point of listening to what they had to say, of respecting their spaces, their bodies. Matthew was a present father, playful, firm when needed, but never ever violent, not even a small tap, not even a pinch. Those who hit to educate only teach the child to solve problems with violence, he would say. My siblings also prospered. The boys finished their studies, got good jobs, married, gave me nephews and nieces. My little sister, the one I was most afraid to leave behind, became a teacher. She was the first person in the family to step into a university. When I saw her receiving her diploma in cap and gown and everything, I thought to myself, it was worth it. Everything was worth it. Time passed and life gradually improved. Matthew managed to open his own repair shop in 1985. It was small, more like a garage than anything else, but it was his. The dream realized in the early 90s. With the children already grown, I even went back to studying. I completed high school, then took an industrial sewing course. I started working in a clothing factory, proud to also bring money home to have my independence. Our children grew up, studied more than we did. John became a nurse. Margaret studied education. Joseph specialized in mechanics like his father. Before I knew it, we were marrying off our children. We were grandparents. Matthew aged as he lived with dignity, without losing his strength or his kindness. At 60, he still worked at the shop every day now alongside Joseph. The white hair and wrinkles only made him more handsome in my eyes. Each line on his face told a story of struggle, of overcoming, of love. I think what marked me most in my life with Matthew was the security, not just the physical security of knowing that no one would hurt me while he was around, but the security of being truly loved without conditions, without demands, the security of being able to be who I was with my scars, my fears, my failures, the security of knowing that even on the bad days when the memories came back and I woke up screaming, he would be there, patient, calming me down, reminding me that the past could no longer hurt me, and the main thing, the security of knowing that my father would never approach me again, because Matthew had made it very clear on the day we fled that if Peter ever tried to find us, he wouldn't leave the encounter alive. It wasn't an empty threat, it was a promise made by a man who rarely promised anything, but when he did, he fulfilled it to the end. I think my father understood the message, because we never heard from him again until we learned of his death. We didn't even go to the funeral. What for? To cry for the man who destroyed my childhood. Better to let the dead bury their dead. The truth is that after so many years beside Matthew, I had almost managed to forget who my father was, what he had done to me. The memories still came in occasional nightmares, but they no longer had the same power over me. I was healed, or at least that's what I thought. It was in March of 2004 that everything changed. Matthew was 74, I was 53. We were planning a little party for our 34th wedding anniversary. Nothing grand, just the family gathered in the backyard, a barbecue, music, grandchildren running all around. Matthew still worked at the shop, although fewer hours, more supervising than getting his hands greasy. That Tuesday he left early, as always, gave me a kiss on the forehead, said he'd be back for lunch. I still remember his smell, mix of aftershave lotion and coffee. He was happy because he had gotten a rare part for an old car he was restoring as a hobby. Today I'm going to get that old Ford purring woman, he said excitedly. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Matthew didn't return. I started to get worried. He never was late. Without letting me know, I called the shop, but it was Joseph, our son, who answered, saying that his father had gone out to get a part and hadn't returned yet. That's when the phone rang. It was from University Hospital, the largest public hospital in Louisville. Are you related to Matthew Williams? Asked the voice on the other end. The world stopped. I felt a chill in my stomach, that terrible feeling comes before news that's going to change everything. I'm his wife. What happened? Your husband was in an accident. A truck lost its brakes on the hill and hit several cars. He's in critical condition. Could you come as soon as possible? I don't quite remember how I got to the hospital. I know Joseph drove me that. Margaret was going to notify the rest of the family. When we arrived, we were taken straight to the ICU. The doctor, a young man with glasses, had that expression no one wants to see, the one that says the news isn't good. He had severe head trauma, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. We did everything possible, but the condition is irreversible. I'm sorry. Irreversible? What a horrible word. What a cruel sentence. How can something be irreversible? All our lives we run after fixing things, improving, doing over. When it doesn't work out and suddenly a doctor comes and says there's no fixing it, that it's over, that my Matthew, my safe harbor, my love, is leaving and there's nothing I can do. I entered the ICU like someone entering a nightmare. My Matthew was there, full of tubes, machines beeping, his face swollen, unrecognizable. I took his hand, still warm. I spoke in his ear, told him I was there, that I loved him, that I needed him to fight. But part of me already knew that wasn't my Matthew anymore. It was just his body, the shell, like an empty house after the resident has left, the essence, the spirit, the soul that was already leaving, already saying goodbye. We stayed there, my children and I, for hours. The grandchildren arrived, his brothers, friends from the shop. Matthew was loved, respected. The waiting room filled with people who came to give support, share stories, cry together. At 8:43 in the evening, his heart stopped beating. It was over. My Matthew had left. The following days were a blur of pain, the wake, the condolences, the paperwork, the burial. Everything seemed to happen miles away, as if I were watching someone else's life. I couldn't cry. I was numb, frozen inside. It was only when I returned to the empty house, when I lay down in our bed and smelled him on the pillow, that the dam broke. I cried as I had never cried before, not even in the worst nights of my childhood. It was a different cry, not of fear or despair, but of profound loss, of an emptiness that seemed to have no end. How will I live without you? I asked the ceiling, the ghosts, the silence of the house. How will I go on? I received no answer, not that night nor in the many that followed. The first months were the worst. Every corner of the house brought a memory. Every object had a story with him. The armchair where he sat to watch the news, the tools in the back room, his favorite mug on the kitchen shelf. Everything hurt me. Everything reminded me that he wouldn't return. My children tried to help, came to visit me, took me to their homes, but I knew they had their own lives, their own families. I couldn't cling to them as I had clung to Matthew, and maybe I didn't want to. Part of me still expected to wake up and discover that it had all been a nightmare, that he was there snoring beside me as always. It was on one of those sleepless nights, almost 6 months after the accident, that I received the phone call that would change everything again. It was an unknown number, and it was already 11 at night. I thought about not answering who would call at that hour, but something made me pick up the phone. Hello, is this Gertrude, Peter's daughter? My blood froze. No one in Louisville knew me as Peter's daughter. No one outside my family knew about my past in the country. Who's speaking? This is Tony, your father's second cousin. I found your number with great difficulty. Your sister gave it to me after I insisted a lot. My sister, what did this man want with her? What did he want with me? What do you want? My father died many years ago. I know, and I'm sorry to call like this, but your Uncle Gerald died yesterday. Your father's brother were having the wake at his house there near Shelbyville. I thought you might want to know Uncle Gerald, a name I hadn't heard in decades. A man I barely knew who I would see now, and then at 4th of July celebrations when I was a child. I felt nothing for him, neither good nor bad. Thank you for letting me know, but I won't be able to come. I live far away. I have commitments. I understand. I just thought you should know your father and your uncle were at odds for many years, but deep down they were brothers, right? Blood is blood, blood is blood. What an empty, what a lying phrase. Blood meant nothing when my own father abused me for years. Blood didn't stop him from destroying my childhood. Thank you for the notice. Good night. I hung up feeling a strange unease. Why did that phone call affect me so much? Why did talking about my father even after so many years still cause that chill in my stomach, that tightness in my chest? Because Matthew was no longer here, because for the first time in more than 3 decades I was unprotected, alone. It was that night, looking at the dark ceiling of the bedroom, that an idea began to form in my head, a crazy idea, perhaps, but one that wouldn't leave me alone. Maybe it was time to go back, to face the ghosts, to step on that land again, not for the uncle I barely knew, but for myself, to prove to myself that I could, that place and those memories no longer had power over me. The next day I called this Tony and asked for details of the wake. It would be at my uncle's farm about 20 m from the countryside where I grew up. The burial would be the next day in the town cemetery. I said I would try to come without committing myself. My children thought it was crazy when I told them, Mom, it makes no sense, you barely knew this uncle, why go to the trouble of going all the way there? Margaret questioned. I couldn't explain properly how to say that it wasn't for the uncle, but for something deeper, more personal. How to explain that I needed to face that place one last time, now as an adult, as a made woman, no longer as the terrified girl who fled so many years ago. I ended up going alone. I took a bus to Shelbyville on a Thursday morning with a small backpack and a heavy heart. The trip lasted almost 3 hours each mile, taking me closer to the past. I tried so hard to forget. When I got off at the Shelbyville station, the smell of the earth, the color of the sky, everything seemed strangely familiar, as if time hadn't passed. I took a taxi to my uncle's farm. During the journey, I recognized landmarks, places that had populated my nightmares for years. The pond where I washed clothes, the store where my father bought moonshine, the little church where we pretended to be a normal family on Sundays. My uncle's farm was full of people when I arrived, people I hadn't seen in decades, some I didn't even recognize anymore. I was received with surprise, some awkward hugs, curious looks. It's Gertrude, Peter's daughter, I heard someone whisper, the one who ran off with a city man. The coffin was in the living room, surrounded by candles and wild flowers. My uncle seemed serene, as if he were just sleeping. I made the sign of the cross, muttered a brief prayer. I felt nothing beyond a vague respect for death. That's when I felt a chill on the back of my neck, that old familiar feeling of being watched. I turned slowly, and there he was, not my father who had been dead and buried for years, but someone who had his eyes, his chin, his way of standing in a corner, watching my cousin Adelmo, son of my uncle Gerald. He was about 5 years older than me, must have been close to 60 now, and in his eyes I saw something that made me swallow hard, the same look my father had, the predator's look. At that moment I knew I hadn't come there for nothing. Fate, God, or whatever it is that moves the pieces of our lives, had brought me there for a reason, and that reason was about to reveal itself in the most terrible way possible. Gertrude, he said, approaching with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's been a long time. You're different. People change in 40 years, Adelmo. Some things never change, he replied, and there was something in his voice that made my stomach turn. I heard your husband died. My condolences. How did he know? Who had told him, and why did the mention of Matthew sound almost like satisfaction? Thank you, I replied, dryly, already looking for a way to move away. But he came closer, lowered his voice so only I could hear. Your father talked a lot about you, you know, before he died. He said you were special, his favorite little daughter. I felt the taste of bile in my mouth. What was he insinuating? What had my father told him? I don't know what you're talking about, and if you'll excuse me, I need to pay my respects to your mother. I tried to move away, but he held my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to keep me there. His face was too close. His breath smelled of coffee and cigarettes. He told me everything, Gertrude, everything. You too did. How good you were to him. At that moment the world seemed to slow down. The voices around became muffled, distant. There was only Adelmo's face, his poisonous words, and the horrible understanding of what he was saying. My father had not only abused me, he had boasted about it, had shared that horror as if telling a hunting story. He was a monster, I managed to say, my voice trembling. And so are you, for talking about it as if it were normal. Adelmo smiled. That smile that didn't reach his eyes. Normal or not, now your protector is gone, and no one will defend you if I decide I want what my uncle had. The threat was clear, raw, repulsive, and something inside me that terrified. Girl I once was wanted to shrink, run away, hide, but there was another part now, a part forged by years alongside Matthew. Years building strength, self-love, dignity. Take your hand off me, I said. Quietly through my teeth now he laughed, squeezing my arm more. Or what will you? Scream, make a scene at my father's wake? No one will believe you. They never believed before. Why would they believe now? That's when I did something I never imagined I was capable of. I looked directly into his eyes without fear, without hesitation, and said, because I'm not that scared little girl anymore. I'm a woman who raised 3 strong children, who has grandchildren, who built a life despite what your uncle did. And if you don't take your hand off me right now, I'm going to break each one of your fingers, and then I'm going to tell everyone in this room exactly what kind of man you are. Something in my tone, in the firmness of my voice, must have convinced Adelmo that I was serious. He let go of my arm, took a step back. You're crazy. No, Adelmo, I'm sadder than ever. I turned my back and walked to the exit. Feeling his gaze following me, I didn't say goodbye to anyone, didn't look back. I took the first taxi that passed on the road and asked to be taken back to the station. I didn't attend my uncle's burial. I didn't visit my father's grave. I no longer needed that closure that I thought I was seeking. The real closure had happened there in that room when I faced not only Adelmo but all the ghosts of my past. On the bus back to Louisville, I cried, not out of fear or sadness, but out of relief, of liberation. Matthew might have left, but what he gave me, security, love, strength, remained inside me. I wasn't alone. I would never really be alone again. What I didn't know, what I couldn't imagine, is that my confrontation with Adelmo was just the beginning, that the real test of my strength was yet to come, in the most unlikely place, at the most sacred moment, beside the coffin of the man I loved most in life. Chapter 3, the final test. 2 months after that encounter with Adelmo, my Matthew would have turned 75. I decided to have a small celebration even without him present. I called the children, the grandchildren, prepared that cornbread he liked so much, a way to keep his memory alive, to show the younger ones that Grandpa Matthew, even though he was no longer among us, was still part of the family. It was during this simple celebration that I began to feel a strange pain in my chest. At first I thought it was just emotion, the longing squeezing my heart. After all, it was the first time we sang happy birthday without him there. But the pain didn't pass. It increased, radiating to my left arm, leaving me breathless. Mom, are you okay? I remember Margaret asking her, face already blurry in my vision. I couldn't answer. My knees gave way, the world darkened, and I only found out later that I had had a severe heart attack, the same heart that endured so many years of suffering, that learned to love despite the scars, almost stopped for good. That day I woke up in the ICU of University Hospital, surrounded by machines and my worried family. The doctors explained that I would need a delicate surgery. The arteries were clogged, the heart too weak to properly pump blood. You were lucky, said the cardiologist, adjusting his glasses on his young face. If you hadn't been with your family when it happened, we might not have been able to help you in time. Lucky, really, or was it Matthew somehow still taking care of me from the other side? The surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks later, enough time for me to stabilize, for the doctors to do all the necessary tests. I stayed in the hospital, monitored day and night. My children took turns keeping me company. My grandchildren came to visit during allowed hours, bringing drawings, little letters, small gifts to cheer up Grandma. I felt fear, of course, at 53 with a serious heart problem. The odds weren't the best, but on the other hand, I felt a strange peace. If my time had come, if it was time to join my Matthew, I would go peacefully. I had lived a full life, had raised wonderful children, had known true love. How many people can say the same? The surgery took place on a rainy Tuesday in September. I remember the sound of the drops hitting the window of the room, while the nurse prepared me, shaving my chest, putting on the hospital gown, checking my vitals one last time. Everything's going to be fine, Mrs. Williams, she said with that forced cheerfulness that only nurses can have at 5 in the morning. You're strong, you'll get through this quickly. I nodded, trying to believe. I kissed each of my children before being taken to the operating room. Whatever happens, I whispered to John, the oldest, know that I was very happy with you. I don't remember much of the surgery itself. The anesthesia took me to a dark and peaceful place, without dreams, without fears. When I woke up, I was already in recovery, my body heavy, my throat scratchy because of the tube they had put in, a dull pain in my chest where they had opened to reach the heart. Recovery was slow, difficult. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, then another month of almost absolute rest at home. Margaret temporarily moved in to take care of me, help with bathing, medicines, food. I, who had always been independent, who had taken care of, everyone now needed to be cared for like a child. It was only at the end of October, almost 2 months after the surgery, that I began to feel like myself again. I could walk around the house without getting tired, prepare simple meals, even take care of the garden that Matthew had planted in the back. You're recovering well, Mrs. Williams, the doctor said at the follow-up appointment, but you need to keep taking the medicines properly and avoid exertion. No doing everything alone like before. Okay, I agreed. Although I knew it would be difficult, I was never one to stay still to depend on others, but I had learned the hard way that life is fragile, that our time here is limited. I needed to take good care of this mended heart if I wanted to see my grandchildren grow up. It was around this time, when I was almost recovered, that I received an unexpected call. It was a Thursday night. I was watching television alone when the phone rang. Hello, Gertrude. It's Adelmo. My blood froze in my veins. Why was he calling me? How had he gotten my number? What do you want? Easy, cousin. I just wanted to know how you are. I heard about your surgery. How did he know about that? Who was passing information about my life to that man? I'm fine, and I prefer that you don't call me anymore. Gertrude, look, I wanted to apologize for what happened at my father's wake. I was nervous, distraught by the loss. I said things I shouldn't have. His voice sounded different, softer, almost repentant, but something in it still gave me chills. Fine, you're forgiven now, if you'll excuse me. Wait, he interrupted before I could hang up. I'm coming to Louisville next week. Business matters. I thought I'd stop by to see how you are. We're family after all. We're not family, Adelmo, not anymore, and I don't want your visit. There was a silence on the other end, and when he spoke again, the false gentleness had disappeared from his voice. You think you can avoid me forever? Louisville isn't that big. I know where you live. I know about your children, your grandchildren. Sooner or later we'll meet again. It was a threat. Clear, direct, undeniable. If you come near my family, I'll go to the police. He laughed, a dry sound without humor. And say what? That your cousin threatened you with? What evidence? Don't be naive, Gertrude. You know how these things work. I hung up the phone with trembling hands. The recently operated heart was beating too fast in my chest, causing a sharp pain. I breathed deeply, trying to calm down. He was bluffing, trying to scare me. I couldn't let him have that power over me. But in the following days, the paranoia grew. I began to see Adelmo's car on every corner, his face, and every man who passed on the sidewalk. I didn't tell my children. I didn't want to worry them. I didn't want to bring the horror of my past into their lives. They knew I had run away from home young, that my father was a bad man, but I never told them the details. Never explained the true nature of that evil. A week after the call, John came to visit me with news that changed everything. Mom, we need to talk, he said, sitting next to me on the couch. It's about Dad. My heart tightened. Whenever we talked about Matthew, the pain of loss came back fresh, as if it had happened yesterday. What about him? Son, we were organizing his documents, those old papers that Dad kept in the blue box, and we found something strange. He took a yellowed envelope from his pocket. Inside, a letter, the handwriting I would recognize anywhere. It was my father's. This letter arrived for Dad about 3 months before he died, explained John, but he never mentioned anything to you. I shook my head, my throat suddenly dry. What could my father have written to him after so many years? With trembling hands, I took the letter from the envelope and began to read. It was short, just half a page, but each word was like a stab. Matthew, you think you beat me, that you took my daughter, my property, but know that even in death I will have the last word. Gertrude was always mine, and always will be. What I planted inside her will never completely die. I'm old, sick, I don't have much time, but I have one last gift for you too, my nephew. Adelmo, he knows everything, and when you're no longer there to protect her, he'll finish what I started. You may have won the battle, but the war is mine. Peter, the words danced before my eyes, their meaning slowly penetrating my consciousness. It wasn't a coincidence that Adelmo showed up at his father's wake. It wasn't chance that he knew about Matthew's death, about my surgery. It was a plan, a monstrous plan traced by my father before dying, a revenge from beyond the grave. Mom, what does this mean? What's this story? I looked at my son, his face marked by concern. How to explain? How to tell him the horrors I lived through that now threatened to return and contaminate the life we had built? It's a very old story, son, I managed to say. Your father saved me from a terrible situation when I was young. My father never forgave us for that. I didn't go into details. I couldn't, but John was intelligent, sensitive. He must have understood at least part of what I didn't say. This Adelmo, is he dangerous? Has he contacted you? I hesitated. I wanted to protect my son, not involve him in this filth, but I also knew that hiding the truth now could put my whole family at risk. He called me last week. Said he was coming to Louisville, that he wanted to visit me. John became serious. His jaw tense in a way that reminded me of Matthew. You're not going to meet this man alone. I'm going to talk to Joseph and Margaret. We're going to take care of this. The determination in his voice brought me a strange feeling, pride mixed with fear. My children wanted to protect me as Matthew had done for so many years. But this wasn't their role. This fight was mine. No, son, you don't understand. This is something I need to resolve alone. Mom, for God's sake, you just came out of heart surgery. You're in no condition to face anything alone. Now I knew he was right. I was weak, vulnerable. Exactly how Adelma wanted me. In the following days, my children set up a kind of guard around me. They never left me alone. They installed a new security system in the house, changed the locks, hired a young man to keep an eye on the street during the night. It was like living in a fortress, but deep down I knew I couldn't live like this forever. I couldn't let fear imprison me again, let the threats of the past dictate my future. At some point I would have to face Adelmo, look into the eyes of the evil my father had planted, and say, enough. This opportunity came sooner than I expected, and in a way I could never have predicted. It was a Monday, early December. I was better, already able to do almost everything on my own, although I still tired easily. John had taken me to the doctor for routine exams and then left me at home, promising to return later with his wife and boys for dinner. I had been alone for less than an hour when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole, expecting to see a neighbor or delivery person, but it was a man in a suit with a grim face. Who is it? I asked without opening. Louisville Police. Mrs. Williams, we need to speak with you. I opened the door with my heart racing. The man showed a badge which I examined carefully before letting him in. What happened, officer? Do you know Matthew Williams? He asked, although I was sure he already knew the answer. He was my husband. He passed away in March of this year. The officer nodded, his face grave. And where were you today? Between 8 and 10 in the morning at the hospital, having tests. My son John was with me. May I ask what this is all about? He sighed, taking a small notepad from his pocket. There was an incident at the cemetery where your husband is buried. Someone vandalized the tomb, and while there was a fight, a man is dead. The world seemed to spin around me. I had to sit down, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. Dead? Who? And what does this have to do with me? His name was Adelmo Pereira. According to witnesses, he was vandalizing your husband's tomb. When he was approached by the caretaker, there was a struggle, and Adelmo fell, hit his head on a headstone. Died instantly. Adelmo dead. The words made no sense in my head. How was this possible just today when I wasn't at home, when he could have taken the opportunity to look for me? And then I understood. He hadn't gone to the cemetery to vandalize Matthew's tomb. He had gone to meet me there somehow. He knew that I visited the tomb every Monday. It was my ritual, my moment of connection with my husband. But today, because of the exams, I couldn't go. Did you know the deceased? Asked the officer. Observing my reaction, I hesitated. What should I say? That he was my cousin, that he had threatened me, that he was part of a sick plan architected by my father from beyond the grave. He was a distant relative. I hadn't seen him in many years. The officer asked me a few more questions, wrote down my answers, and finally said goodbye, saying they would get in touch if they needed more information. I remained seated on the couch long after he left, trying to process what had happened. Adelmo was dead. The threat had ended before it really began. It was as if Matthew somehow was still protecting me, keeping away the evil that tried to reach me. When my children arrived later, and I told them what had happened, I saw the relief on their faces. The shadow that hung over us had dissipated. We were safe again. That night I dreamed of Matthew. He was young again, like when we met, smiling in that calm way that always calmed me down in the dream. He just took my hand, kissed my forehead, and said, "Everything's fine now, my love, everything's fine." I woke up with tears in my eyes, but they were tears of relief, of gratitude. I knew that the nightmare had really ended, that the cycle of violence that began when I was only 10 years old was finally broken. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't imagine, is that the real test of my strength was yet to come, because 3 days after Adelmo's death, I received another unexpected visit, a visit that would bring to light even more painful truths, and would make me question everything I believed I knew about my past, about my father, and about the very nature of evil. Chapter 4: Closure. 3 days after Adelmo's death, I was still trying to process everything that had happened. My children insisted that I not stay alone, but I Needed a bit of space of silence to organize my thoughts. I convinced Margaret to go to work, assuring her that I would be fine for a few hours. The house was quiet that Thursday morning. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, observing the small garden that Matthew had planted. The roses he cared for so much were in bloom, red and vibrant, as if they wanted to remind me that life continues, that beauty persists even after we lose those we love. That's when I heard knocks at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone at that hour. For a moment the fear returned. What if it was someone connected to Adelmo? What if the threat hadn't died with him? I approached, cautiously looking through the peephole. It was an elderly woman, bent by the ears, supported by a cane. I didn't recognize her immediately, but something about her seemed familiar. "Who is it?" I asked, my hand hesitant on the lock. "Mrs. Williams? It's me, Zephyr, sister of your Uncle Gerald." Aunt Zephyr. I barely remembered her, a quiet lady who rarely left the farm, who always seemed frightened of everything and everyone. What would she be doing in Louisville? At my door I opened carefully, still suspicious. She seemed even smaller than I remembered, fragile as a bird, her completely white hair forming a bun on top of her head, her face wrinkled like crumpled paper. "Aunt Zephyr, what are you doing here? Can I come in?" My child, the trip was long. My legs aren't what they used to be. I made way, watching as she dragged herself inside, her steps small and hesitant. I helped her sit on the couch, offered water, coffee, something to eat. She accepted only a glass of water, which she drank in small sips, her hands trembling, holding the glass. "I heard about Adelmo's death," she said finally, her voice low, almost a whisper. "That's why I came." I felt a tightness in my chest. What did she know? Why had she come looking for me? "It was a terrible accident," I replied, cautious. "The officer said he fell, hit his head." Adelmo was my great-nephew, son of my niece Louise with Gerald. I got confused for a moment. "But Gerald wasn't your brother. How could Louise be your niece?" And she interrupted me with a tired gesture of her hand. "Families in the country are like that, my child. Everyone ends up being related to everyone somehow." There was something in her tone, a bitterness, that made me suspect there was more to this story than she was telling. "Aunt Zephyr, forgive my frankness, but why did you come here? We haven't seen each other in more than 40 years. She took a deep breath, her shoulders fallen as if carrying an invisible weight. "I came because I can't die taking this secret with me. I came because you deserve to know the truth about your father, about Peter." My heart raced. After so many years I thought I already knew everything I needed about my father, that he was a monster, a predator who destroyed my childhood. What other truth could there be? My father died a long time ago, and what he did to me also stayed in the past. She slowly shook her head, her eyes full of an old sadness. "No, my child, what he did to you began long before you were born. It's a story of evil that passes from generation to generation like a disease." I sat down, suddenly weak. Something in her voice, in the intensity of her gaze, told me that what I was about to hear would forever change the way I understood my own story. "Your father, Peter, was the son of my older brother Juvenile," she began, her voice gaining strength as the story unfolded. "Juvenile was a cruel, violent man. He beat his wife, his children, and he did things that no one spoke openly about at that time." She paused as if gathering courage to continue. "He abused his own daughters in the same way that Peter did with you." Later the revelation hit me like a punch. My grandfather, a man I never knew, had been just like my father. The horror I lived through hadn't begun with me. "How do you know what my father did?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Everyone knew, Gertrude. No one talked, but everyone knew. That's how it was in families. Certain things were ignored, swept under the rug, especially when they involved powerful men like your grandfather, who was the biggest landowner in the region." I felt a growing anger inside me, not only for what I had suffered, but for knowing that people like Aunt Zephyr knew and did nothing, and no one helped, no one did anything. She lowered her eyes, ashamed. "I tried once when I realized what was happening to you. I spoke to your mother, warned her that Peter was following in his father's footsteps. She threw me out of the house, said I was a crazy old woman making up stories." I remembered my mother, always sick, always fragile, always denying the obvious, preferring to believe that her daughter was lying rather than face her husband's monstrosity. "Your mother was also a victim in her own way," continued Aunt Zephyr. "When she married Peter, she didn't know what she was getting into. When she found out, she was already trapped with small children with nowhere to go. That doesn't justify her not having protected me." I replied, harder than I intended. "No, it doesn't justify it. Nothing justifies it." Aunt Zephyr sighed deeply. But what I came to tell you is about what happened after you ran away." She then told how my father went crazy when he discovered I had fled with Matthew, how he swore revenge, how he started drinking even more, how he became violent. With my siblings, your younger brothers ended up being sent to a boarding school in Lexington by intervention of the parish priest. Your little sister, well, she ended up going to live with an aunt on your mother's side. And my father, I asked, fearing the answer. He became obsessed with the idea of finding you, of taking revenge. He spent what little money he had hiring people to look for you. When he found out you were in Louisville, he even came here a few times, but never managed to locate you exactly. A chill ran down my spine while I was building my new life with Matthew. My father was hunting me through the streets of Louisville. How many times had he been close without me knowing? But the worst continued, Aunt Zephyr, was what he did with Adelmo. Your cousin was just a boy when your father began to poison his mind. He told terrible stories, lies about you, about how you had seduced him, then run away with another man. He planted in that boy a sick hatred and obsession. So that's why I muttered, remembering Adelmo's look at the wake, the insinuations, the threats. He really believed that my father and I, Adelmo, grew up hearing that you were a debt to be collected, that one day when your father could no longer, it would be his responsibility to finish the job. Peter transformed that boy into an extension of his own evil. Tears were running down my face, now not for myself, but for Adelmo, a boy who could have been anything, who could have had a normal life, transformed into an instrument of revenge, into a continuation of a cycle of abuse. But there's something else you need to know, Gertrude, something I only discovered recently after Gerald died. She opened the worn purse she carried, took out a yellowed envelope. Inside there was a letter, the handwriting I immediately recognized. It was my father's. I found this among Gerald's belongings. It stated 3 weeks before Peter died. With trembling hands I unfolded the paper. It was a long, detailed letter addressed to Adelmo. In it my father explained exactly how he should find me, how he should approach me, how he should destroy me. The details were so specific, so cruel, that I could barely continue reading. But it was the last paragraph that really froze my blood. When the time comes, don't waste time with her. The old woman isn't worth the effort. What matters are her grandchildren, the girl especially. She's the same age Gertrude was when I started. Continue the tradition, and remember, this doesn't end with you. Find another to continue when you can no longer. That's how we ensure our legacy never dies. I let the letter fall, horrified. It wasn't just about me. It never was. It was about perpetuating the abuse generation after generation. It was about transforming the horror I lived through into a sick tradition that would never end. Why? I began, my voice failing. Why are you showing me this now? Aunt Zephyr took my hands in hers, her naughty fingers squeezing mine with surprising strength. Because you need to understand the evil you faced, because you need to know that what happened to Adelmo in the cemetery wasn't coincidence or accident. It was the end of a chain that could have continued for generations. What do you mean? What are you saying? I'm saying that Adelmo didn't go to the cemetery to vandalize your husband's tomb. It was because he knew you would be there like every Monday, and it wasn't the caretaker who confronted him. She paused, her eyes fixed on mine. It was your husband, Gertrude. Matthew. For a moment I thought I hadn't heard right, or that Aunt Zephyr was senile, confused. Aunt, my husband died 9 months ago. Yes, but your oldest son didn't. John, isn't it? He looks a lot like his father, has the same height, the same build, from a distance, wearing the hat your husband always wore. Understanding hit me like lightning. John, my son, knew about the threats, had read my father's letter. He had understood the danger that Adelmo represented, not just for me, but for the whole family, for his own daughters. He was there, Gertrude, waiting for Adelmo, dressed like your father. The witnesses who saw from a distance, who spoke to the police, thought it was the caretaker because he was wearing dark clothes, but it was your son, protecting his mother as his father would have done. My God, my son had confronted Adelmo, had accidentally or intentionally caused his death, had put an end to a threat that could have destroyed several lives. How do you know all this? Because I was there too, she answered simply. I followed Adelmo from Shelbyville. I knew what he was planning to do. I wanted to stop him, somehow make up for not having helped you when you were a child. She then described how she saw everything happen from behind a nearby tomb, how Adelmo arrived armed, how he waited hidden, how John surprised him from behind. The fight that followed was brief, violent. Adelmo slipped, hit his head on a marble headstone. He died instantly before John even realized the severity of the blow. Your son fled before anyone else arrived. I stayed, called for help, told the story of the caretaker, No one questioned a confused old woman, a dead man in an accident, case closed. I remained silent, trying to process it all. My son had killed a man to protect me, had risked everything, his freedom, his future, his family. For me, what should I do now, Aunt Zephyr? Should I confront him? Should I go to the police? The old lady slowly shook her head. What's done is done. Adelmo chose his path. Your son protected his family. The police already closed the case as an accident. Sometimes Gertrude, silence is the greatest mercy we can offer. She got up with difficulty, refusing my help. I came here to tell you this because you deserve to know that it's over, really over. The evil that your father planted, that he tried to perpetuate even after death, has been uprooted. You are free now. Truly free. I walked her to the door, still stunned by everything I had heard. Before leaving, she turned one last time. One last thing, Gertrude, your siblings, they're well. The boys have their own families now. Your sister is a school principal in Lexington. They never knew what you went through, what your father did. Maybe it's time to reconnect, to heal that part of your story too. After she left, I sat on the porch again, looking at Matthew's roses. The world seemed different now, as if a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been removed from my shoulders. My son arrived at the end of the afternoon, as always, to check if I was okay. I looked at him with new eyes, not just my boy, my firstborn, but a man who had done the unthinkable to protect his family. I saw in him the same determined look as Matthew, the same silent strength, the same unshakable sense of justice. I didn't mention Adelmo, nor the cemetery, nor Aunt Zephyr's visit. Instead, I asked him to sit beside me on the couch as we used to do when he was small, and I read stories to him before bed. Son, I think it's time for you to meet your uncles, my siblings, those who were left behind when I ran away with your father. He seemed surprised but didn't question. He just nodded, squeezing my hand between his large, strong hands. Callous from work like his father's. Whatever you want, Mom, I'm here to support you. At that moment, I understood the true meaning of a broken cycle. My father had tried to create a lineage of abuse, of pain, of control. But what I created with Matthew's help was a lineage of protection, of love, of sacrifice for the good of others. In the months that followed, I reconnected with my siblings. It was strange at first, awkward, as young people say today. So many lost years, so many stories not shared, but gradually we built bridges over the abyss that my father had created between us. My baby sister, now a mature woman of almost 50, cried when we hugged for the first time in 4 decades. I always knew you had run away to protect us, she whispered in my ear. Even as a child, I knew. As for John, we never spoke directly about what happened in the cemetery. Some truths are too heavy to be put into words, but in the subtext of our looks, in the shared silences, there was understanding, there was gratitude, there was forgiveness, not for the act itself, which was protective, but for the burden he would carry forever for having taken a life, even if of someone who intended to harm us. Today at 73, I look at my family gathered, children, grandchildren, nephews I met late, and I see the true miracle of my life. I not only survived the horror, but created beauty from it. I not only escaped the darkness, but generated light that continues to shine in each new generation. And when I think about my Matthew, it's not with sadness, but with deep gratitude. He not only saved me from that house of horrors when I was 16, he taught me to love, to trust, to build. He gave me the tools to break a cycle that could have continued indefinitely. Some people say that love can't overcome everything, that there are wounds too deep to be healed. Maybe they're right in part. The scars remain, the occasional nightmares still come, but love, true, patient, kind love, can create something new and beautiful from the ruins. It can transform victims into survivors, survivors into warriors, warriors into builders of a better world. This is my story, a story that begins in the deepest darkness, but ends in the light, a story that was almost silenced forever, but now serves as testimony that there is always hope. Chapter 5, Full Circle. Life has a funny way of surprising us when we least expect it. After I reconnected with my siblings and discovered the truth about Adelmo, I thought my story had come to an end, at least the painful part of it, that from then on would be just peaceful days watching my grandchildren grow, enjoying old age with the peace I fought so hard to conquer. But fate still had one last chapter in store for me, a chapter that began on a March afternoon in 2005, exactly 1 year after Matthew's death. I had gone to the cemetery, as I did every Monday, to bring fresh flowers to his grave. It was no longer a visit of mourning, but almost a conversation with an old friend. I would tell the news of the week, the progress of the grandchildren, the small joys of everyday life. On that particular day I had brought roses from our garden which continued to bloom as if Matthew was still there to tend them. That's when I noticed a woman standing a few yards away watching me. She was young, probably in her early 30s, thin dark hair tied in a simple ponytail. There was something familiar about her, something I couldn't immediately identify. When I finished my prayers and turned to leave, she approached. She walked hesitantly, like someone who isn't sure whether to continue or not. "Mrs. Williams?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded. Cautious after everything I had been through, I learned to be careful with strangers who knew my name. "My name is Claire." Claire Pereira. The last name made my heart race. Pereira, the same last name as Adelmo. "Are you related to Adelmo?" I asked, already instinctively looking for an escape route. She lowered her eyes as if the name caused shame. "He was my father." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Adelmo's daughter, right there in front of me. Had he poisoned her mind too? Was she there to continue what her father couldn't finish? "What do you want from me?" I asked, harsher than I intended. "I came to ask forgiveness," she replied, raising tear-filled eyes to meet mine. "For what my father did, for what he planned to do." I remained silent, confused. This wasn't what I expected to hear. "I knew," she continued, her voice breaking. "I knew about his plans, his obsessions. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen to me. He said it was a matter of honor, of family debt." Looking at that young woman, I saw what Adelmo could have been without my father's toxic influence, someone normal, capable of distinguishing right from wrong, capable of empathy. "How did you find me?" I asked, still suspicious. "After he died, I found notes, letters. Your address was there. I've spent months gathering the courage to come talk to you." I gestured to a nearby bench. We sat side by side, two women united by a terrible story that neither of us had chosen. Claire then told me her story, how she grew up hearing distorted stories about me, about how I had seduced and then abandoned my own father, how Adelmo cultivated an obsession that only grew worse with time, how she, as she grew up, began to question these stories, to notice the inconsistencies, to understand that there was something deeply wrong in her father's fixation. "When he found out about your husband's death, something changed in him," she said, wringing her hands in her lap. "It was like he'd received a sign of permission. He started planning, talking about settling scores." I tried to argue, tried to show that it made no sense, that so much time had passed, but he wouldn't listen to anyone. I felt a mix of emotions as she spoke. Pity for her for growing up with a father like that, anger at Adelmo for not having been able to break the cycle as I had done, and a strange relief realizing that his daughter had rejected the hatred, had chosen another path. "On the day he died," continued Claire, "I knew where he was going. I tried to stop him, threatened to call the police. He locked me in the house, took away the car keys. When I managed to get out and reach the cemetery, it was already too late." She paused, taking a deep breath as if gathering courage. "I saw what happened, Mrs. Williams. The first saw your son there. I saw the fight. I saw when my father fell." I tensed immediately. Was this a veiled threat? Did she know it hadn't been an accident, that it hadn't been the caretaker? "I'm not here to cause problems," she added quickly, noticing my fear. "On the contrary, I came to ensure that you know the secret is safe with me. Your son did what he needed to do to protect the family. My father chose his path." Tears were running down her face, now silent. "More than that, I came to break this cycle once and for all. I have a young daughter, 5 years old. I don't want her to grow up with this hatred, with this obsession. I want her to be free from this horrible story." I looked at that young woman, brave enough to reject her father's legacy of hate, to seek healing, not just for herself, but for the next generation, and something opened inside me, a final knot of distrust and fear that I didn't even know I still carried. "Your father wasn't born a monster," I said, surprising myself with the words. "He was made that way, molded by my father, who in turn was molded by his father. A chain of abuse and violence that comes from long before either of us," I told her. Then what Aunt Zephyr had revealed to me about my grandfather, about how my father was raised, about how Adelmo was manipulated from childhood to continue a sick cycle, not to justify what he did or planned to do, but so she would understand that evil rarely comes from nothing. It is cultivated, nurtured, passed unlike a poisoned inheritance. "The important thing," I concluded, "is that you chose differently. You looked at this horrible legacy and said, no, that requires a courage that few have." Claire smiled through her tears. "I had no choice. When my daughter was born and I held her in my arms for the first time, I knew I would do anything to protect her, including protecting her from her own grandfather if necessary." In that moment I saw that we were more connected than I ever imagined, both mothers determined to protect our children, both forced to make difficult decisions out of love, both fighting to break a chain we didn't create but that threatened to drag us down. Your daughter is lucky to have you as her mother, I said, squeezing her hand. And your children and grandchildren are lucky to have you, she replied. I have one last thing to give you. From her purse she took out a yellowed envelope. Inside there were several letters written by my father over the years, letters addressed to Adelmo, full of hatred, of plans for revenge, of detailed instructions on how to find me, how to hurt me. I found these hidden in his room after he died. I think you should have them, to burn, to destroy, to do whatever you think is best. I took the envelope with trembling hands, the last physical connection to my father, the last evidence of his calculated evil. Thank you, was all I could say. We said goodbye right there in the cemetery, too. Different branches of the same twisted family tree, both determined to straighten our own branches to ensure that the next leaves would grow healthy, free from the poisonous shadow of the past. That night in the backyard of my house I made a small fire. One by one I burned my father's letters. I watched the words of hatred turn into ashes and smoke carried away by the night breeze. It was the definitive end, the closure of a cycle that began long before me, but that would end with me. When the last letter turned to ashes, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. It wasn't just relief, it was completeness, as if a journey of decades had finally reached its destination. In the following years, I kept occasional contact with Claire. We would meet a few times a year, usually in the park where her daughter could play while we talked. The girl Mary was smart, cheerful, with curious eyes that knew no fear or distrust. Looking at her running and laughing under the sun, I saw the living proof that evil can be defeated, that new beginnings are possible. My days now are peaceful, filled with small joys. I tend to my garden in the morning, welcome my grandchildren on weekends, play cards with my friends from the neighborhood on Wednesdays. Every now and then a nightmare still wakes me in the middle of the night, but they are increasingly rare, increasingly less vivid. It's funny how life comes full circle. That terrified girl from rural Kentucky who barely knew how to read and write properly is here today at 73. Telling her story to people all across America. Who would have thought, right? I decided to share my story not for fame or attention, but because I know that somewhere, perhaps even watching this video right now, there is a girl, a woman, living her own private hell, someone who thinks she's alone, that no one will believe her, that there's no way out. And if my story can give hope to that person, if it can show that it's possible to survive, rebuild, find happiness even after the worst of horrors, then it will have been worth reliving these painful memories. My Matthew is gone, but what he taught me remains alive in me, the capacity to love, to trust, to see beauty in the world despite the scars, the strength to face evil head on, to say no, to protect those we love at any cost, and perhaps most importantly, the certainty that the past doesn't need to determine the future, that we can choose to break cycles, that we can write our own endings. Today when I look in the mirror, I no longer see that frightened girl with empty eyes. I see a survivor, a woman who faced the worst that a human being can face, and still didn't lose the capacity to love. I see someone who managed to transform pain into strength, trauma into wisdom, fear into determination. My friends, if you've come this far on this journey with me, my heart overflows with gratitude. It's not easy to listen to stories like mine. It's not comfortable to face the reality of abuse, of complicit silence, of lives marked by violence, but it's necessary. It's necessary for us to talk about this, to bring to light what for so long was hidden in the shadows. If this video touched you in some way, I ask from my heart that you give it a thumbs up, that you subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Each subscription helps bring this important message to more people who need to hear that they are not alone, that there is hope, that there is life beyond abuse. Remember always, your story doesn't define your future. Your scars are marks of battles you survived, not of defeats. And as long as there is life, there is possibility of a new beginning, of healing, of transformation. From the bottom of my heart, this 73-year-old grandmother who has known the worst and the best of life thanks you for listening. May God bless and protect you. And may you never ever lose hope until the next video. And remember, you are stronger than you imagine.